A ballistic missile rises into the sky, flames tearing across the launch pad, while thousands of kilometers away bankers approve transactions, cargo ships change their identities, and anonymous computers quietly move millions of dollars through digital wallets. At first glance, these events seem completely unrelated. But they are connected by one question that has puzzled governments for decades. How does North Korea keep paying for one of the world's most expensive weapons programs while living under some of the toughest international sanctions ever imposed? Look at a map of the Korean peninsula. North Korea sits between China and Russia, separated from South Korea by one of the most heavily fortified borders on Earth. From above, it appears isolated, surrounded by powerful neighbors and watched by satellites, warships, and intelligence agencies. International sanctions restrict what it can buy, what it can sell, and who can legally do business with it. On paper, this should leave the country's economy suffocating. Yet year after year, missile tests continue. Nuclear facilities expand. New military technology appears. Engineers unveil increasingly sophisticated ballistic missiles capable of traveling extraordinary distances. The costs of developing these systems are enormous. They require specialized materials, imported components, scientific expertise, industrial machinery, fuel, transportation, and a steady supply of foreign currency. None of these come cheaply. The obvious assumption is that sanctions should eventually force the program to slow down. If money stops flowing, factories stop operating. If trade disappears, technology becomes harder to acquire. If foreign currency dries up, importing critical equipment becomes nearly impossible. That logic seems straightforward, but reality tells a different story. Instead of collapsing under economic pressure, North Korea gradually changed the way it earns money. Sanctions did not erase the need for revenue, they changed where that revenue came from. Every restriction closed one door while quietly increasing the value of another. Legal exports became difficult, so hidden trade became more profitable. Traditional banking became inaccessible, so alternative financial networks became more important. Physical commerce faced greater scrutiny, so entirely new methods of generating income emerged. The result is something few people ever see. Behind every missile launch lies an invisible financial system. Behind every weapons test sits a network of traders, shipping companies, overseas intermediaries, cyber operators, front businesses, and carefully managed state institutions working together to keep resources flowing. The military hardware is visible. The economy supporting it is deliberately designed not to be. To understand how this happened, we have to go back long before nuclear sanctions dominated international headlines. When the Democratic People's Republic of Korea was established in 1948, it adopted a centrally planned economy. The state controlled factories, farms, transportation industry, banking, and foreign trade. Economic decisions flowed downward through government planning rather than market competition. The guiding philosophy emphasized self-reliance, an approach intended to reduce dependence on outside powers and place national production under centralized control. For decades, this system functioned alongside extensive economic relationships with the Soviet Union and other socialist countries. Subsidized fuel, favorable trade arrangements, industrial assistance, and external support helped sustain North Korea's economy despite its structural inefficiencies. Military development and heavy industry received priority, while consumer goods remained secondary. Political objectives consistently outweighed commercial efficiency. That priority became even stronger as military considerations increasingly shaped national policy. The armed forces occupied a privileged position in the allocation of resources. Infrastructure, industry, research, and production increasingly reflected strategic needs before civilian prosperity. Economic performance mattered, but preserving state security mattered more. Then everything changed. In 1991, the Soviet Union collapsed. Almost overnight, North Korea lost its largest economic supporter. Preferential trade arrangements disappeared. Cheap imports became expensive. Energy shortages spread through industry. Agricultural production declined as fertilizer and fuel became scarce. Factories slowed or stopped altogether. The centralized economic system that had relied on external assistance suddenly faced a reality it had never been designed to survive. The consequences were devastating. Throughout the mid-1990s, North Korea experienced a catastrophic famine often referred to as the Arduous March. Food shortages spread across the country. Hundreds of thousands of people died, with some estimates exceeding 1 million. Entire communities struggled to survive as state distribution systems failed to deliver basic necessities. At that moment, many observers believed the regime itself might collapse. Instead, something unexpected happened. Ordinary people began creating informal markets simply to stay alive. Families traded food, clothing, household goods, and whatever they could obtain. Small-scale commerce appeared outside official planning structures. Local trading networks expanded because survival demanded flexibility that centralized institutions could no longer provide. From the perspective of the government, these markets were initially signs of economic failure. Over time, however, they became something else. Rather than eliminating every unofficial exchange, the state gradually learned to tolerate, regulate, and sometimes exploit parts of this emerging informal economy. What began as spontaneous survival slowly evolved into a system that could generate resources outside the traditional model while remaining ultimately subject to state influence. That adaptation would prove far more important than anyone realized. Because when international sanctions intensified years later in response to North Korea's nuclear program, the country was no longer relying solely on the economic system the world thought it understood. It had already begun building another one beneath the surface, one designed not around prosperity, but around resilience. The timing could hardly have been more consequential. In 2006, North Korea carried out its first nuclear test. The international response was swift. The United Nations Security Council imposed sanctions aimed at restricting the flow of money, technology, and materials that could support the country's weapons programs. It was the beginning of a pressure campaign that would expand with almost every major nuclear or missile test that followed. Another test brought another round of restrictions. After the nuclear tests of 2009, 2013, 2016, and 2017, sanctions became broader and more detailed. Entire industries were targeted. Coal exports, once a major source of foreign currency, faced severe limitations. Iron ore, seafood, and textiles were progressively restricted. Overseas labor programs that had generated valuable income came under increasing pressure. Petroleum imports were capped. Financial institutions were warned against conducting business with North Korean entities. Shipping companies faced greater scrutiny, while insurance providers, banks, and logistics firms became far more cautious about any transaction connected to the country. On paper, it looked like a tightening net. Each new resolution attempted to close another pathway through which money could reach Pyongyang. The expectation was straightforward: reduce exports, restrict imports, isolate financial networks, and eventually the state would struggle to finance expensive strategic programs. But economies rarely stand still under pressure. They adapt. Every barrier changes incentives. Every closed route increases the value of finding another one. Imagine a river blocked by a dam. The water does not simply disappear. It searches for cracks, creates new channels, and eventually finds another path downstream. North Korea's economy behaved in much the same way. Legal trade became more difficult. Hidden trade became more valuable. Direct banking became risky. Intermediaries became essential. Official commerce shrank. Unofficial commerce expanded. This did not mean sanctions failed entirely. They imposed real costs. North Korea lost legitimate export revenue, experienced shortages of certain goods, and faced higher transaction costs almost everywhere it operated internationally. Moving products became slower, paying suppliers became more complicated, accessing advanced technology became increasingly difficult. But difficulty is not the same as impossibility. Instead of eliminating commerce, sanctions transformed the structure of commerce itself. Smuggling networks became more sophisticated. Middlemen became more profitable. Front companies became more important. Every participant willing to accept additional legal or financial risk could demand higher compensation for helping goods or money move across borders. The hidden economy was no longer simply filling gaps left by the formal economy. It was becoming an economic system in its own right. Some operations relied on companies that existed largely on paper, registered in jurisdictions far from the Korean peninsula. Others depended on brokers who purchased goods through multiple intermediaries before they ever approached North Korean buyers. Transactions were divided into smaller pieces. routed through different financial channels and disguised behind layers of commercial activity that appeared ordinary when viewed individually. Shipping evolved as well. Cargo vessels could change names, alter ownership records, or operate under different national flags over time. Some ships manipulated their automatic identification system, or AIs, the tracking technology that allows vessels to broadcast their position. Signals could disappear for hours or days before reappearing somewhere unexpected. International monitoring organizations have also documented ship-to-ship transfers in which cargo, including petroleum products, was moved between vessels at sea rather than unloaded through conventional ports. To an observer looking at satellite images, it might appear to be two ordinary ships meeting in open water. In reality, the transfer could represent another piece of a sanctions evasion network. Meanwhile, North Korea's largest trading relationship continued to carry enormous importance. Historically, the overwhelming majority of its legal external commerce has passed through China. Geography makes that difficult to replace. Shared borders, established transportation links, and long-standing commercial ties mean that even under sanctions, the Chinese frontier remains one of the most significant gateways connecting North Korea with the outside world. That does not mean all cross-border activity violates sanctions. Much of it involves humanitarian needs or transactions permitted under international rules. But the existence of extensive commercial infrastructure also creates opportunities for illicit actors to hide among legitimate flows of goods and services. The distinction becomes increasingly difficult to identify. The more global commerce expands, the easier it becomes for individual transactions to blend into millions of others moving through ports, warehouses, banks, and freight companies every day. Recent geopolitical developments have added another layer. Following Russia's invasion of Ukraine, reports from governments and international observers have described growing cooperation between Russia and North Korea, including alleged arms transfers and expanding economic engagement. While the exact scale remains subject to continuing assessment, the broader pattern illustrates an important reality. International politics can reshape economic networks just as dramatically as sanctions can. As relationships change, new opportunities emerge, new partners appear, new routes develop, and every successful transaction serves the same ultimate purpose. Because moving money across borders is never the final objective. Eventually, that money must purchase something tangible: fuel for factories, components for machinery, materials for missile production, technology that cannot be manufactured domestically. The hidden financial system exists for a reason. The next question is where all of those resources ultimately end up. Follow the money far enough, and nearly every hidden revenue stream points toward the same destination. North Korea's strategic priorities have remained remarkably consistent, even as its methods of financing them have changed. Economic growth has value, industrial production has value, foreign trade has value, but above all else sits the objective of preserving the state and maintaining a credible military deterrent. That priority shapes every major allocation of scarce resources. Building a modern nuclear weapons program is extraordinarily expensive. Scientists must be trained. Research facilities must operate for years. Specialized metals and industrial equipment must be acquired. Missile engines require precision manufacturing. Launch sites demand constant maintenance. Testing consumes fuel, logistics, transportation, and engineering expertise. Every successful launch represents thousands of interconnected decisions made long before a rocket ever leaves the ground. For most countries, those costs are supported by taxation, exports, investment, or international trade. North Korea operates under a different reality. Its leadership cannot rely on unrestricted access to global financial markets. It cannot freely borrow from international lenders. It cannot simply attract large volumes of foreign investment. Instead, every dollar earned through legal commerce, every shipment that successfully crosses a border, every sanctions evasion network, and every cyber operation capable of generating foreign currency becomes another potential source of funding for strategic priorities. Perhaps nowhere is that transformation more visible than in cyberspace. Unlike coal mines or textile factories, cyber operations require no cargo ships, no customs inspections, and no physical border crossings. A skilled team with computers and internet access can reach financial institutions and cryptocurrency platforms located thousands of kilometers away. Over the past decade, governments and international investigators have repeatedly linked North Korean state-backed hacking groups, including the Lazarus Group, to increasingly sophisticated financial cyber attacks. One of the most famous occurred in 2016. Hackers infiltrated Bangladesh Bank and attempted to steal nearly $1 billion through the international SWIFT banking system. Most of the fraudulent transfers were stopped, but approximately $81 million was successfully diverted before investigators interrupted the operation. It was a warning that cyber theft had evolved beyond ordinary financial crime. For North Korea, it represented something much larger. Digital operations could generate foreign currency without depending on exports that sanctions had already restricted. As cryptocurrency became more widely adopted, another opportunity emerged. Rather than targeting traditional banks alone, hackers increasingly focused on cryptocurrency exchanges and digital asset platforms. Investigations by governments, blockchain analysts, and United Nations experts have attributed multiple large-scale cryptocurrency thefts to North Korean-linked actors, with cumulative losses reaching into the billions of dollars over recent years. Stealing digital assets, however, is only the first step. The money must still be cleaned. Cryptocurrency can be moved through mixers, decentralized exchanges, multiple wallets, overseas facilitators, and complex chains of transactions designed to make tracing ownership increasingly difficult. Eventually, portions of those funds can be converted into usable currency capable of purchasing real-world goods. The remarkable aspect of this model is not simply the theft itself. It is that cyber operations bypass many of the barriers sanctions were originally designed to create. Sanctions were built around ports, banks, shipping companies, exports, imports, and physical trade. Cyber operations attack the financial system directly. The battlefield is no longer confined to oceans and borders. It extends into servers, networks, encrypted wallets, and global digital infrastructure. And yet even digital money must eventually become something physical. Machine tools, industrial components, electronics, fuel, transportation, the virtual economy ultimately feeds the real one. Viewed individually, each smuggling route, hacked exchange, front company, or ship-to-ship transfer appears to be a separate story. Taken together, they form a single economic architecture, a parallel system built not to maximize prosperity, but to maximize resilience. That distinction changes the entire conversation. For years, public debate often framed sanctions as a simple question: either they work or they fail. Reality is far more complicated. Sanctions have unquestionably imposed enormous costs. They have reduced legal exports, restricted financial access, increased transaction expenses, and forced North Korea to devote tremendous effort towards sanctions evasion instead of conventional commerce. But they have also created powerful incentives for adaptation. The hidden economy did not emerge because sanctions were meaningless. It evolved because survival demanded innovation under pressure. Every closed pathway encouraged another one to develop. Every enforcement measure triggered another adjustment. Every technological change created another opportunity. This pattern extends far beyond the Korean peninsula. Modern geopolitical competition increasingly takes place inside global financial networks, commercial shipping systems, digital infrastructure, and international supply chains. Power is measured not only by armies and territory, but by the ability to move money, acquire technology, and exploit the gaps connecting legitimate commerce with illicit activity. Return to that opening map. The Korean peninsula still appears isolated. Its borders remain heavily monitored. Warships still patrol nearby waters. Satellites continue watching ports and missile sites. Yet the most important connections cannot be seen from space. They run through anonymous corporate registrations, encrypted cryptocurrency wallets, financial intermediaries, container ships crossing international waters, cargo transferred in darkness, computer networks spanning continents, invisible channels carrying the resources that sustain visible military power. That may be the greatest paradox of North Korea's hidden economy. One of the world's most isolated states has learned to survive by embedding itself inside the very global systems that were supposed to contain it. And as long as those systems continue evolving, the challenge facing the international community will not simply be stopping missiles after they are built. It will be identifying the financial, digital, and logistical networks that make building them possible in the first place. Because in the 21st century, the most powerful weapon may not be the missile rising into the sky. It may be the invisible economy that quietly paid for its launch.